Chapter 7 of The Man with the Red Beard by David Whitelaw. This recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne. Chapter 7 The City of Unrest. It was, I think, the third day after my arrival when Bernard came to me at my hotel. He had been, he told me, longer than he expected, had indeed been forced to enter the city on foot. This, when I remembered the snow-spread wastes I had passed over, I knew had been no easy task. His first news came as a surprise to me, and I fear gave me a pang of disappointment. Myra, it appears, was at liberty, her sudden arrest having been followed by a no less sudden release, a custom which was very frequently resorted to by the police, and which had the effect of disintegrating the little bands of suspects against whom there was insufficient evidence to warrant them taking even the farce of a trial. This information placed me in a somewhat difficult position. The romance with which I had been pleased to imbue my knight-errantry fell away, leaving me standing merely a messenger, charged with the delivery to a girl whom I did not know of a sum of money from a man whom I had seen once. I felt annoyed. But there was no lack of things to interest me in the city. The days of leniency which preceded the coming of St. Nicholas's Day came quickly to an end when the day had gone without fulfilling its expectations. The Tsar had not come to Moscow, and the people were muttering. The infamous Black Hundred were thirsting for blood and booty, and were only awaiting official permission to hurl themselves upon the defenceless mobs. The revolutionaries, on their part, felt that their days of grace were over, and that war, both open and secret, was before them. They held their meetings and drew up their plans, and the hearts of them welcomed the coming change from enervating peace to rousing action. I do not remember quite in their order the events of those Moscow days. The transition from silk-lined ease of London to the barbaric snow-clad heart of Russia had been so rapid. Bernard came and went at all hours, and at different times he had with him members of his organization, who welcomed me courteously, and, on Bernard's guarantee, even admitted me to some of their less formal gatherings. If I had looked for the mysterious excitement of masked men in dim-lit cellars, weird passwords, and dagger-enforced oaths, I would have suffered grievous disappointment. The circle to which my friend belonged, although the most merciless of the Maximus, had no time or thought to spare for theatrical ritual. Whether, at their more solemn gatherings, they surrounded themselves with such things, I cannot say. But at the few meetings I was privileged to attend with Bernard Bergstoff there were seldom more than 6 or 8 persons, and the rendezvous would invariably be the apartment or flat of one of them. As I have said, I do not remember just how many days I passed in the fermenting atmosphere of the city, but there stands out a night, clear-cut in my mind, a night of stars and glittering snow, a night in which I knew that a greater power than coincidence had guided Paul Bergstoff to me that night in the Empire. I had been at a small meeting held high up in a house off the Tverskaya, and I had met Myra Ramsay. I remember having been vaguely surprised that she was not like my vision, that is, excepting the eyes, grey and fathomless, which were those I had seen in my dream. Her face, too, although oval, was somewhat squarer than my face of fancies, and the chin, finely moulded, was set a little forward, giving a look of purpose to her expression. Her hair, chestnut and gold, was coiled round her shapely head and gathered into a great knot at the nape of her neck. There had been no chance for me to tell her my errand. I felt that having looked into those grey eyes the whole world had changed for me, that, already, I was like to forget that a man who had trusted me lay in an English prison, that is, if he still lived. At the latter thought my heart seemed to turn in my breast. I had been sitting alone in a café thinking of the evening I had spent, but now I got up and walked rapidly down the glistening street. I trust that my thoughts were more worthy ones as I drew the clean cold air deep into my lungs. Paul Bergstoff had trusted me. That, I said, was enough, and I would not go back on him. Now that I had seen Myra Ramsay, I could understand the sacrifice he had made for her. Indeed, I felt elated at the thought that I, too, might be called upon to give of my best in such a service. I walked the streets of Moscow that night for some hours. They were all but deserted, save for little knots of soldiers who stood at street corners, and who scrutinized me closely as I passed them. There was a curious air of expectancy over everything and everybody. Waiting describes it best. The few people who were out of doors walked with bent heads and huddled in their furs, silent phantoms in the snow. Only their eyes as they glanced up at one were alive with haunted expectancy. The houses, too, shuttered and silent like tombs as they were, seemed to suggest great animals holding their breath, as though, were one to throw open those doors, families would be found, not sleeping, but gathered round stoves, tensely waiting. Here and there a rim of light showed beneath a blind, or the curtain would be drawn from an upper window, and a silhouetted form would peer for a moment down into the street below. But there were courtyards and little cul-de-sac where more activity showed, where dark forms of great-coated men and tethered horses would be gathered round a fire lit on the snow, the red light playing on bayonets and swarthy faces. These, too, were waiting to play their part in what everyone knew was inevitable. When at last I entered my hotel, I found that Bernard had already retired, and I was glad of this. My thoughts were quite sufficient company for me that night. I let my room remain in darkness, and stood looking out over the hushed city. Before me the domes and minarets of the churches clustered round the Kremlin cut fantastic shapes against the star-powdered sky, their lower parts stained red by the glow of fires burning in the streets. Camp-fires, no doubt, such as I had seen on my walk, or perhaps the police had seized the material piled together by the rioters to form a barricade, and were destroying it. What a wonderful city was this ancient capital of Muscovy! Vignettes of its eventful history came to me as I stood with my elbows on the sill, drinking in its romantic beauty. For 6 centuries the Tsars of all the Russias had been crowned with pomp and circumstance beneath those barbaric domes. Nearly a century ago the little Corsican had brought an army and, in suffering, had taken it back across the wastes of snow. Like Ivan the Terrible, Napoleon had watched Moscow burning. Over there on the great plain the present Tsar had hidden his face at the evil omen when thousands of peasants met their deaths in the wild stampede for the coronation mugs. Perhaps it was the immensity of the scene, perhaps the magic of the night, or it may have been that somewhere near me Myra Ramsay was sleeping, but I felt an ecstasy steal over me that caused me to raise my arms to the stars as though I called them to witness, as I whispered out, come what might, I would be true to the trust Paul Bergstoff reposed in me. My rest that night was very disturbed. I slept lightly, waking frequently to see red light dancing on the ceiling, and to hear shouts, some distant, some again just beneath my window. At the first sign of dawn I gave up all idea of further sleep and tumbled into my clothes. On looking from the window I saw that everything was for the moment quiet, but I noticed that here and there the snow had been trampled into a dirty coloured mud, and in one spot was stained with a sinister red. On a side street which opened out a little to my left, a deserted barricade composed of benches and tables taken from some café was smouldering to extinction, the dark smoke spiralling up into the clean air. 3 grey-coated soldiers stood by, leaning on their rifles. Moscow lay spread out before me like a jeweller's tray of barbaric gems. The newly risen sun flushed the snow-covered roofs, and here and there blazed on some gilded cross or grotesquely painted tower. From afar off came the elusive sound of bells. I asked the waiter who came up with coffee what had been happening in the night. He was not very enlightening, and was evidently badly scared. There had been fighting, yes, but where he was not able to tell me. Ivan, the cook, had gone out to sea, and had crawled back with a bullet through his leg. After that it had been barred doors and conjecture. I spent a couple of hours writing a report to send to the Mercury. The postal strike made it a matter of chance whether Winston would ever receive it, but I had faith in the good offices of my friend Berryman at the British Consulate. I took the package to him in person about 10 o'clock. End of chapter 7.